I can't stop talking about Godzilla Minus One, so I figure I'll make some videos on it. Today I want to discuss the beautiful writing and the themes of Godzilla Minus One and why this script is so good, why the script for this film was so well written, and why it's capturing so many people's imaginations right now all over the world in various different cultures all over the country. Several of my friends, regardless of their race, gender, creed, or background, have told me how much they love Godzilla Minus One because the message, albeit in some ways very disturbing along the way, is a hopeful one. Now, before I go any further, I want to let you know that this is going to contain spoilers for the film. And I recommend that if you have not seen the movie, hurry and go out there and see it now before it's out of the theater. The good news is that Toho is hopefully going to keep opening up showings. However, because of the fact that it's still not really a wide released film, it's going to be limited. So the best thing to do to experience this movie is to see it in the theater in all its glory with the best sound and with the best video. Home versions of this, even the best 4K, will not replicate the movie theater. So I want to talk about the incredible writing that's in Godzilla Minus One. The writing of the characters, because not only do the main characters in Godzilla Minus One have a character arc, as should most stories, as should most well-written stories, you gotta have the journey of a character from one point of his life or her life and one mentality to them growing out of their experiences. But Godzilla Minus One goes far and away beyond that. When we look at our main character, Koichi Shikishima, he is a kamikaze pilot, a guy who may have had good intentions when he joined the military to help his country, ultimately decides that it's not worth him throwing away his life, being afraid to just take his own life at a whim, especially for a war that didn't even seem winnable from the Japanese at that point in World War II. He lands on Oda Island and meets Sosaku Tachibana, who is the mechanic, naval air mechanic, and one of the best ones in the military, and the character which to me probably has the most powerful arc tying into the main character. You see, the beautiful thing about this script and this writing is that all these characters have arcs, and it's because they have each other and because they have their interactions with each other that they're able to really learn about not only each other but themselves in this incredible story where people, despite having differences, despite playing the blame game during World War II, have to come together to face an even bigger threat. The threat of extinction at the hands of Godzilla. Now, with Japan being at zero economically, militarily, morale-wise, Godzilla appears and brings it down to -1. It's now in the negative. But Koichi Shikishima, his journey is such a beautiful one because he's thrust into a situation where Noriko Oishi and Akiko are brought into his life as a surrogate wife and daughter. First, it seems to be by happenstance, but because at this point the Japanese had really needed to be united, they stay together as the months and years go by, as Japan begins to rebuild and he begins to rebuild his life. Imagine the trauma of coming home from war and going to your home. He literally goes to his house and finds it destroyed, his parents dead. His neighbor, Sumiko Ota, another very important character with a very powerful arc, blames him. You see, as ridiculous as it may sound to have a military that wants to ask its soldiers to literally sacrifice their lives because they don't want to put ejection seats in planes, at the time, many people in Japan felt like the kamikaze pilots were real warriors. They were real, powerful, sacrificial lambs, and they died with honor. And because Koichi chose not to take his own life for a war that was unwinnable, he was branded a coward, not just by Sumiko, but also by Tachibana. It's very beautiful how both of these characters behave antagonistic towards him at the beginning, but by the end of the film, the two characters and Koichi flip-flop as far as their perspectives go, because Godzilla takes everything away from him. Koichi was recovering and healing, and the person who was helping him recover was Noriko. Noriko was there for support. He finally, after years of hiding the truth from her, finally confessed to her that he thought he was a coward, not just for abandoning the military and not going through with being a kamikaze pilot, but also for not firing on the T-Rex sized Godzilla on Oda Island, which may have cost the lives of everybody else there. The amount of guilt that Koichi feels over this is shown us time and time again, and a lot of it has to do with the unbelievable performance of Ryunosuke Kamiki, who does an incredible job in this film, really grabbing us by the heartstrings and making us feel the pain, the guilt, the suffering that goes on in his head. He's haunted by his dreams, ghosts that he invented, according to Noriko herself. And it's giving him so much guilt that he can barely breathe. He can barely live his life comfortably because he feels like he should have been one of the ones that died, not just in the war, but on Oda Island. And it's almost like he was spared by some sort of strange force. Noriko's perspective, however, what she straight up tells him, is that people who survived the war were meant to live on, that those who died were meant to die, and that she also lost her parents. Noriko was the character that brought Koichi back. She, in many ways, saved his soul. And when she was taken away from him at the hands of Godzilla during the Ginza attack, at this point, Koichi had nothing left. Akiko, whom he did love, was still somebody who he wasn't, or he didn't feel like he was fit to take care of on his own, which is why, thankfully, Sumiko was there to sort of be that aunt or babysitter figure, that motherly figure for Akiko. But at the end of the day, it was always Noriko and Koichi who Akiko saw as her parents, despite them not being blood related. The fact that at the beginning of the film, Koichi does not want this family and does not want to be the father of Akiko until eventually care about her so much that he would sacrifice his own life to protect her future, to make sure Godzilla can't hurt any more people. Losing Noriko, or thinking he lost her, was the most painful thing he had been through since the war. And at this point, he felt like a tortured soul. He couldn't escape his own head. He couldn't escape what he was thinking of. He couldn't escape his demons, his ghosts. She was the only one who kept him alive. She was the only one who kept him grounded and away from that depression. And now with her gone, he felt like he had no choice. But the choice wasn't ultimately made just by Koichi. It was also the choice of Tachibana, who, after a long time, chastised Koichi for not doing the right thing, finally understanding that at this point, he was not the same Koichi from Oda Island. His perceived cowardice, which I don't even think is cowardly at all, because the Japanese military should never ask its soldiers to take their own lives on purpose. And the film very much criticizes the Japanese government at the time and how they didn't care much about life at all. And Koichi himself was put into a very difficult decision that many pilots faced during those days, for real. But it wasn't until Koichi was actually willing to give up everything to secure the future of Akiko, even though she would live on without him, that Tachibana realized that he was finally ready and that his arc was about to be complete. And as a result of that, his entire mood changed. The most powerful word in Godzilla Minus One, if I could pick one word, it is when, in the climax of the film, when he ejects out of his jet before it explodes in Godzilla's mouth and blows off his head, was the flashback that we don't see originally, where Tachibana tells Koichi, live. And don't just live for Akiko. Live for yourself. Live to live, because the war was over. Godzilla was the continuing final piece of the puzzle. That is why, when asked earlier in the film why he did not marry Noriko before she was seemingly killed by Godzilla, he answers that his war wasn't over yet. In his head, the war never ended. Even though the war may have ended for Japan, in his head, the war never ended. And Godzilla represented everything. Godzilla was the physical representation of his pain, his guilt, his insecurities, his depression, his anxiety, his obsession with having this survivor's guilt. And he thought that if he could put an end to Godzilla and himself simultaneously, it would be over. But the powerful words and the love that Koichi truly had for Akiko kept him alive. And I'm glad it did, because had he died, he wouldn't have been able to reunite with Noriko in the film's tearful final scene. Well, almost final scene. Shin Godzilla was more political than this film was, but this film had much more heart. And this film did criticize the Japanese government, albeit from the 40s, not the early 2010s Japanese government that Shin Godzilla was criticizing with its subtext. But here, this entire story, including Doc's speech near the climax where he says that unlike the war, we want this campaign not to be near death. We want this campaign not to be guaranteed death, but we want everybody to come back alive. Everyone has said it, and I'm going to say it again. The human characters in this movie, you don't want any of them to die. They're all likable for their own reasons, the men and the women. They all have understandable reasons as to why they feel the way they feel. And they all represent a different side of our lives at a different point in our lives. Which is why writer-director Takashi Yamazaki wrote such a human script, because this movie represents every aspect of the human condition. The anger that you feel from Sumiko because she lost her children. Not all of us have ever been through a situation where we've lost our children, where our children have died. Some of us don't even have kids yet. But imagine that kind of pain. And I'm sure you know somebody who has. And a lot of times when pain comes at you, human beings play the blame game. And sometimes it's rightfully justified. Other times it's not. But it's something we all do as a coping mechanism. We've all been Tachibana. We've all been around that coworker who doesn't do the right thing, and we chastise them because we think that we know so much more, until we finally find out the truth about ourselves and them. We've all been Koichi. We've all been afraid of doing something that could cost us everything. We've all been haunted by our own mistakes. We've all been haunted by our own guilt at some point in our lives. Noriko, the loving supporter. If you've ever been in a relationship, regardless of your gender, and the relationship went well at least at some point, you had to have been that nurturing soul for your partner. That's just part of being an adult in life. This movie is not a movie that kids are going to understand. It's PG-13. It's not that violent, even though it is very violent, and some of the imagery is extremely, extremely powerful. Really, it's a story that you understand more about the unfortunate truth that life isn't always going to be easy. And there are going to be painful moments in our journey that we go through. But that's not the only character. Mr. Noda, the scientist, has an easy job, but soon is thrust into being a much more important person, constructing and using every bit of his brain to figure out a way to defeat Godzilla, because no weapon they have could possibly damage the creature. Don't forget the captain. Don't forget the captain, and don't forget the kid. The kid missed the war. He's very naive about war. He wanted to fight in the war to prove himself to be honorable to his country. Meanwhile, the others who did fight in the war, the older ones, tell him, don't be ridiculous. You don't understand the true pain that is war, especially when you're fighting in it. In fact, at one point in the film, he is told that not being in a war should be something to be proud of, which sounds like the very much not something that's pro-military, but it makes perfect sense because this movie does have a very strong anti-war narrative, despite it being so powerful. But at the end of the day, the kid does get his moment. He does help. He becomes useful, and all the other characters respect him more. By the end of the film, he has everyone's respect because of how responsible he was for helping everyone and showing his bravery. Godzilla Minus One is going to be a difficult one for them to top. You're going to have to get a very qualified writer with a vision to even come close to writing a story like this, because it's rare for a story to have 2 or 3 likable characters. It's very rare for one to have all lovable characters, and you're talking to a guy who goes to see Godzilla movies, usually cheering for Godzilla even when he's the antagonist, because I never connected with the humans. And in this movie, because of its powerful imagery, not just of the humans, but of the absolute chaos that the callous and almost pure evil Godzilla who toys around with the humans for most of this movie. He's truly evil. He's not just a force of nature in this movie. He almost is sadistic in inflicting pain on the humans. And he was even like that before he mutated. To see this devilish creature be put down by good people is what anybody wants. And this is the only Godzilla movie where, by the halfway point when Ginza was destroyed and Noriko was seemingly lost, I said to myself, this motherfucker's gotta go. And I've never said that about a Godzilla before, but this one had to go. This movie, I'm going to be talking about it and thinking about it for a long time. And that's why I think if you've already seen it, hopefully this made you appreciate the story even more. There is so much to be discussed about the themes of this film and the incredible script, but for right now, the character arcs here, it makes it almost a perfect story. It's not perfect, but story-wise, it's an absolute gem of work from Yamazaki and the entire crew at Toho.